Hello everyone, Inquisitor Vaughn here, and in today's video I would like to continue with our Cursed Founding chapter series by going into the Black Dragons. The Black Dragons chapter are one of the Adeptus Astartes chapters that was said to be created as part of the 21st Cursed Founding. They are perhaps one of the most recognizable of the Cursed Founding chapters for the extent of their mutations. The armor color of the Black Dragons is black and white, their heraldry is of a white dragon's head, and their war cry is fire and bone. It is listed that the Black Dragons are a Salamander's successor chapter, but I want to speculate a bit further about that later in the video. The Black Dragons are a fleet-based chapter and have no homeworld. It has been recorded that many Black Dragons have a variety of tattoos and scars on their bodies that originate from their lives previous to being inducted into the chapter, lives that are described as less than salubrious or less than healthy. This could mean many things, and I interpret it to mean a reference to where the chapter gets its recruits from, ranging from prison worlds to hive world gang populations. The Black Dragons chapter was created around the 36th millennium and have been a rarely cited chapter since their creation. This might be because available information says that it did not take long after the chapter's creation for their gene seed mutations or curses to show. This is in comparison to the Blood Gorgons, who were declared renegades 60 years after their creation, and the Flame Falcons, whose deviation showed up around 100 years after their founding. Two conflicts that they were known to have fought in were the Plague of Undeath on Antagonists, where they fought against zombified Imperial Guard regiments and a Chaos Warband, and they also fought in the Third War for Armageddon against the Orcs, alongside a host of other chapters and Imperial organizations, in which they committed 9 out of their 10 companies to the fight. Forces of the Inquisition were present in both conflicts and were able to see some of the flaws that the Black Dragons had, raising their suspicions about the chapter. In organization, the Black Dragons adhere to the tenets laid out by the Codex Astartes. They display their company color on their knee pad. Black Dragons are known to replace their Aquila with the white wyvern-like dragon that is their heraldry. They have a few chaplains, and the chapter master of the Black Dragons is referred to as the High Dragon, who is said to sit on a throne of bones. The Black Dragons have a few characteristic differences from other Astartes Marines, and their differences only increase over time, with the source of these differences being the nature of their gene seed. The Black Dragons are known for their gene seed flaws, which connect them to the Cursed Founding, or at least the idea of the Cursed Founding. There are in fact 2 renditions of the Black Dragons in regards to how they appear in the lore and the nature of their flaws. The first rendition is that of a chapter created as part of the 21st Cursed Founding, which primarily has a mutated Os Medulla. This rendition is the version of the Black Dragons that you will find in most publicly available information on them. The second rendition is of the Black Dragons as how they appear in the stories and books about them, such as the book Death of Antagonists by David Annandale and the Salamander's Omnibus by Nick Kime. This kind of dual narrative thing happens when a chapter already exists, and then authors take the idea of the chapter and expand on it. Because the events in the books about the Black Dragons are canon, we have to take into account the information on the Black Dragons in them, and in these books, the mutations of the Black Dragons extend far beyond what most people realize. So, the primary flaw of the Black Dragon's gene seed is its ability to make the Marines imbued with it grow bone extensions from their forearms, their elbows, and their foreheads. The Black Dragons chapter are known to weaponize these bone-like growths by sharpening them or otherwise sheathing them in adamantium in order to use them in combat. Those Black Dragons who have these bone weapons are often grouped together into unique assault squads called Dragon Claws. Though available information doesn't go into detail about what type of combat the Black Dragons specialize in, because of their weaponization of their flaws, they are known for particularly being brutal in close combat. In writings about them, the Black Dragons are possessed of such fury and hate that they can fight toe-to-toe with chaos-corrupted World Eaters. When trying to understand the flaws of a chapter, our first impulse is to go through the list of gene seed organs and identify which one seems to relate most to the flaw. If we were to do this with the black dragons, we would primarily be looking at the os medulla organ. The os medulla is the second gene seed organ to be implanted into an initiate space marine, and it basically increases the size and strength of the recruit's skeletal structure. It works in combination with the Biscopia to transform the Astartes into the monsters that they become. The os medulla is also designed to fuse the Astartes ribcage in order to protect the Marine's vital organs. Being that that organ has the effects that it does on the Astartes body, it's understandable that people look at the effects of the Black Dragon's curse and relate it to that organ. Indeed, it is said in multiple references that it is a mutation or tampering with the os medulla organ that is the reason for the development of horns and claws that the Black Dragons eventually develop. But what about the other flaws? According to the stories featuring them, it would seem as though as time goes on, a black dragon's appearance changes from a normal human-looking visage to a pale white or grayish appearance. The inside of their mouths become black, their tongues become pointed, and their canine teeth form into fangs that go over their lips. Their eyes become fully black, and their skin develops a scale-like texture, similar to a reptile. Just a note, I've heard in certain places that the black dragons have poisonous fangs. That is not true and is not supported in any information about them that I could find. I think that's just a rumor that the community accepted as true. It also might be based on the chapter's heraldry. The kind of dragon represented on the heraldry seems to be a wyvern, which is a type of dragon that doesn't breathe fire but instead utilizes poison. But the poison is in their tails, not their fangs, so I don't know how the connection between that and the fangs of the black dragons could be a thing. A bite from a space marine is technically poison anyway due to the Becher's gland, so it doesn't really matter overall, but the black dragons specifically don't have poison-filled fangs like snakes, at least according to what information I could find. What is interesting about the black dragons is that not all of them look monstrous or seem to be affected by the gene seed mutations at all. Not all of them look flawed, and for the Marines that are not flawed, they still design their armor to have horns and bone blade modifications. This is because the chapter accepts and even venerates or honors the flaws that they have. When the chapter was required to send in gene seed tithes, they resisted largely until they were forced to do so, and when they did, their gene seed, or at least the gene seed they submitted, was shown to be stable and without any defects, thus perplexing the Inquisition, which knew the flaws from first-hand accounts, adding more mystery to the chapter. Clearly, this is a chapter that has a lot going on with them, so to understand them, we have to look at them a little bit deeper, through piecing together information on the chapter's practices. The first piece of valuable information concerning the black dragons is that not all black dragons experience the supposed gene seed flaw of their chapter. In the story Death of Antagonist, an Inquisitor Lettinger of the Ordo Malleus is observing the Marines of the Black Dragons chapter. In this part of the story, he observes the difference between two sergeants, Sergeant Volos and Sergeant Taharan. Taharan has no mutations and in fact has a full head of blonde hair, has light skin, and no horns jutting from his forehead. However, Volos was the complete opposite. Standing at more than 3 meters tall, Volos had all of the mutations I described earlier. His skin was a dark gray and scale-like, his eyes were black, his teeth had formed into fangs, he had horns coming out of his forehead, and bone blades coming from his forearms. Inquisitor Littiter believed in that moment he uncovered how the black dragons were able to pass their gene seed inspections. They must gather samples from aberrant black dragons like Taharan, who seemed normal, to send in for inspection, and due to the apparent lack of mutation in the Marines like Taharan, the chapter was able to artificially keep its non-mutated status in the eyes of the Mechanicus Genitors. He also assumes that gene tampering was occurring in the chapter. He shares the assumption that the black dragons were a successor of the salamanders due to their darkish skin. And finally, he believes that there is enough evidence to consider the black dragons a result of the 21st cursed founding. The Inquisitor explains that the dragon claws were composed fully of black dragons who experienced the chapter's skeletal-based physical deviation, and explains it by saying that it was their os medulla that was responsible and that it, quote, didn't stop growing, eventually forming horns and blade-like bones to extend from their forearms. Another piece of lore states that the apothecaries of the Black Dragons chapter encourage these bony growths in the chapter. How they do this specifically is unknown, but there is information on a series of rites that a black dragon must go through in order to be considered one of the mutated brothers of the chapter. These rites are called the Rite of Bone, the Rite of Fire, and the Rite of Claw, but no information is available on these rituals. Another piece of information surrounding the Black Dragons is the character Zartath. Zartath was a black dragon that had been separated from his squad in the warp, was found by the salamanders and taken back to Nocturne for testing and examination. Eventually, due to his heroic actions in the defense of the salamanders during a Dark Eldar attack on Nocturne, Zartath was made an honorary member of the salamanders, serving as a scout specialist. In this book, the author makes quite a few references to the Black Dragons being salamander successors, from Zartath being referred to as a distant brother to it even being possible that Zartath could become a member of the chapter. However, when he was first captured by the salamanders, the apothecary Emic collects genetic information from Zartath in order to understand his physiology. We never discover what is found, and we aren't given an actual confirmation that the Black Dragons are sons of Vulcan. Mind you, this is twice in two different stories that the Black Dragons are assumed to be successors of the salamanders without actual concrete proof. In appearance, Zartath had grayish white skin, a mouth that was black on the inside, teeth that were fangs, and a pointed tongue. In descriptions of him, he also had horns and was said to have yellow eyes. Another piece of information that is important to understand about the Black Dragons and their flaws is when 10 of the most mutated Black Dragons that were taking part in a campaign were taken by a Dark Eldar homunculi that was said to be particularly interested in the cursed founding chapters. Through its twisted experiments, the Xenos was able to separate the curse from the Black Dragon's genome, and it was described as an osteovirus or a bone virus. The osteovirus was distilled and purified in one example, it was weaponized in another example, and it was reintroduced to a host in another example, this example being a concentrated form of the osteovirus. When the concentrated form was reintroduced to a subject, a creature that could only be described as a bone dragon erupted from the body of the subject. If the osteovirus of the Black Dragons can be separated from the Black Dragon's genome, this suggests that it was initially added onto it. Last but not least, the Black Dragons chapter war cry is fire and bone, but another saying of the chapter is bless the curse, which is a statement of acceptance and even thankfulness for the curse that afflicts them. That was a lot of information, I know, but all of it is important to get a well-rounded understanding of just how odd the Black Dragons are. I want to talk about the theory that the Black Dragons are successors of the Salamanders chapter. Games Workshop has straddled the fence with confirming whether or not they are actually successors of the Salamanders. In books written about them, it's suggested but not confirmed. However, in an article published in, I think, 2021, Games Workshop seemingly confirms that the Black Dragons are successors of the 18th Legion. Still, the Black Dragons in the Space Marine codexes have been listed as having an unknown lineage. The official take from GW is that they are successors of the Salamanders chapter. So, that is what they are. But allow me to explain why that doesn't make any sense. It can be easy to assume that by their name and their heraldry, they are somehow related to the Salamanders chapter, but that's too simple and direct. That's standard 40k level thinking. If we could compare, the salamanders have pitch black skin, while the black dragons have pale white to grayish complexion. The salamanders have burning red eyes. Black dragons either have fully black eyes or yellow eyes that do not glow. Other than their complexion and eyes, the salamanders look like normal human beings. The black dragons can end up looking like serpents, with scaled skin, pointed tongues, and fangs on top of the fact of their bone structures being mutated. Nothing about the black dragons suggests that they are descended from Vulcan, so the idea that they are salamander successors is odd. We could argue that because the Curse Founding's goal was to get rid of flaws, the salamander's condition of dark skin and red glowing eyes could have been considered a flaw, and so the Genitors tried to reverse it. Considering that the salamanders had black skin and red eyes, and the black dragons had whitish gray skin and black eyes, it could be seen as a kind of reversal. But still, that does not explain other elements of the black dragon physiology, such as the fangs, the bones, etc. In trying to determine which gene seed lineage the black dragons come from, there are two ways of approaching it. If we approach it from the idea that they are actually a Cursed Founding chapter, then we can say the way they turned out was a result of the Genitors trying to fix the salamander's gene seed. However, if we approach it from the perspective that they are not a result of the Cursed Founding, but instead are another Dark Founding chapter, we can come to other conclusions. Remember, a big part of this series is trying to determine whether or not the chapters listed in the Cursed Founding are actually subjects of the Homo sapiens Novus Project. Because not only was the Cursed Founding a myth made by the Inquisition, but another founding, the Dark Founding, happened around the same time as the so-called Cursed Founding. So far in the series, only one chapter listed seems to actually be a Cursed Founding chapter. So reconsidering the black dragons is understandable. It's here that I present my theory that the black dragons are not actually sons of Vulcan and successors of the Salamanders chapter. Instead, I think the black dragons are sons of Corvus Corax and successors of the Raven Guard chapter. The Raven Guard Legion was one of the legions that would suffer greatly during the Horus Heresy, especially at the Dropsite Massacre, where the Raven Guard, Salamanders, and Iron Hands were caught in the crossfire of enemy traitor legions and nearly annihilated. Corvus Corax would take what remained of his legion back to their homeworld and would devise a plan to replenish his legion's numbers. He would communicate with the Emperor about the state of his legion, and the Emperor would allow Corax to study the original texts on how to create Space Marines. Corax was given access to the original Primarch template in order to create new gene seed for his legion using his DNA, with the goal of accelerating the process to quickly rebuild his legion. At first, the result of this was basically comparable to Primaris Marines in that the Marines produced were stronger and faster and overall better Marines than what came before them. Corax would call these Marines Raptors. But eventually, after finding out about the new Marines, the Alpha Legion sabotaged these efforts by corrupting the pure Primarch gene stock. Some sources say it was demon blood, others say that it was a demon blood infused virus. But the result of using the corrupted gene seed combined with the accelerated process of the gene seed implantation process was that it produced horribly mutated Astartes, some of which could barely function or think. Some had an overwhelming musculature, some had overgrown skeletons, some grew claws for fingernails. For those that he could use, Corax would lead and deploy, but rarely did he destroy any of the deformed raptors. The existence of the raptors is largely not talked about due to how tragic their fate was. Knowing the story about the raptors, there are quite a few correspondences between them and the Black Dragons, as well as the Raven Guard and the Black Dragons as a whole. A virus was used to corrupt the Raven Guard raptor gene seed, and the Black Dragons have what has been described as an osteovirus. The Raven Guard gene seed eventually imbued those made with it with pale skin and black eyes. The Black Dragons would eventually develop pale skin and black eyes. the Raven Guard would eventually have horribly mutated Marines in their legion due to the manipulation of their gene seed, and the Black Dragons chapter would be composed of mutated Marines due to the manipulation of their gene seed. If the Black Dragons were made from raptor gene seed that was somehow secreted away, the fangs, the scale-like skin, the pointed tongue of the chapter would all be due to the demonic virus that was added into their gene seed. This theory not only gives explanation for all of the flaws of the Black Dragons, but it also makes it possible that the Black Dragons are not a cursed founding chapter despite legitimately being cursed. Even when the nearly 2,000 raptors of the Raven Guard Legion were all mutated during the heresy, their mutations varied and were inconsistent, with some more extreme than others. Some weren't even able to speak or pick up bolters. Others were able to operate at an even greater capacity despite their mutations. So it would make sense that the effect of the gene seed, or the effect the gene seed has on the Black Dragons, would be varied, with some Marines seemingly having no flaws and others being overwhelmed by them in the same chapter. The demonic origin of the flaws that the Black Dragons have also makes sense. The effect on their skeletal structure is something that you see all the time with demons. The horns and other sharp bones breaking through their bodies, scaled skin and discoloration in odd places. This theory might sound a bit far-fetched, but remember, the Carcharodons, the space sharks, are also suspected space marines made from Corax's gene seed line, and look how they turned out. They are also pale, they also have black eyes, and they are also flawed, though temperamentally rather than physically. If the Black Dragons were made from an altered gene seed sourced from the days of the Horus Heresy, then the Black Dragons share the same history as the Lamenters chapter. Now, like I said, that's just my theory. I think the Black Dragons are Raven Guard successors. Games Workshop says that they are Salamander successors. It's a safe bet to go along with what GW says in that regard, but they seem to be unsure themselves with how they straddle the fence on whether or not they are actually Salamander successors. In the current lore for Warhammer 40k, the Black Dragons are one of the chapters that have received the technology to turn their Marines into Primaris Marines, and reinforcements in the form of Primaris Grey Shields were given to them. Which is interesting considering that Primaris Marines are far more stable than the Marines that came before them and also have less flaws. So I'm interested in seeing just how Primaris Black Dragons are going to be. Like, apparently they still have the bone structure that comes out of their forearms, but I'm interested in the appearance of the Marines. Like, are they still scaled? Do they still have black eyes and pale skin? And you know, I'm interested in those kind of things, because according to the lore for the Primaris, they possibly won't have those things. In regards to whether or not the Black Dragons are actually a cursed founding chapter or are subjects of the Homo sapiens Novus project, I would say that they are not. Which surprises even me, because the Black Dragons are like the face of the cursed founding, and I genuinely believed at one time that the Sons of Antaeus and the Black Dragons were the only two real cursed founding chapters. But I've changed my mind. I don't think they were subjects of the Novus project. Instead, I think they were a dark founding chapter created using some shady gene seed. There are too many natural correspondences to the Raven Guard and not enough to the Salamanders for me to believe that they are sons of Vulcan. The Black Dragons also don't fit my standard of what a real product of the Novus project should have or should be. As a chapter, they are not larger than regular Astartes. In the story Death of Antagonus, Sergeant Volos was around 9 feet tall and towered over the other Astartes, but that kind of height wasn't said to be widespread throughout the chapter, so he might have just been unique. Like Alexis Pollux in the Imperial Fists. He was huge, but he was an Imperial Fist, and not all Imperial Fists were that height. Secondly, the flaw of the gene seed was externally added, but was not sourced from the subjects of the gene seed. So, the Black Dragons are not a cursed founding chapter. But that was my deep dive into the Black Dragons chapter. I hope you enjoyed, or at least learned something new. I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments below. If you liked the video, please like it and share it with a hobby friend, as it helps the channel grow. Without anything else to say, Inquisitor Vaughn out. Remember, the Emperor protects, and the future is successor.